Mr. Hirsch, I have a question for you. You are a writer whose writings have been translated, and of course, as Ms. Mushat said, you are a subtle reader who I suppose already read thousands of translated books. What do you think about translated poetry? Isn't the process of translating actually toxic for the poetry itself? I mean, how much of a writer's thought can we preserve in a translated version of a poem?
Well, your point is a very good one. That, do you want to translate the question?
Am întrebat pe domnul Hirsch cum vede poezia tradusă, cât poate fi păstrat din gândul unui autor atunci când este tradusă poezia. Nu e de fapt traducerea un fel de a distruge autenticitatea. No.
So, yes, in one sense it's true that the translator is a traitor, and that because poetry is related to language and sound, something is always lost in translation. Robert Frost said poetry is what's lost in translation. This is your idea, what you're saying.
Ceva, într-o bună măsură, traducerea e o trădare și ceva se pierde inevitabil în traducere. Ceva e mereu pierdut. Și Robert Frost a scris că poezia lost in translation.
Okay. On the other hand, of course it's much better to read other poetries in other languages. And so it'd be best to know the language.
Sigur că e bine să citești poezie în limba originală.
But there are also expressions in poetry in one language and sensibilities that don't exist in other languages.
Există sensibilități, expresii care sunt intraductibile.
So it's true I should know Russian to be able to read Mandelstam and Tsvetaeva.
Ar trebui să știu rusă ca să-i citesc pe Mandelstam și pe Tsvetaeva.
And I should know Hungarian to be able to read Attila József and Miklos Renati. I'm picking some of my favorite poets. And I should know Turkish to be able to read Nazım Hikmet. And I should know Greek to be able to read Konstantin Gavafi. And I should know Chinese to be able to read the Tang Dynasty poets.
So, trebuie să știu foarte multe limbi turcă ca să citesc toți autorii valoroși în original.
So of course it would be better to read all of these in the original. But if I can't read Japanese so that I can read the great haiku poets like Basho and Issa, then the next best thing I can do is read them in translation. And because there really isn't anything like Tang Dynasty poetry in English until we have translations, we need these translations. And there isn't anything like József Attila until you read it. And if you can't read Hungarian, you need it in English, for me, or you need it.
Nu știu limbile respective, mai bine să citesc în traducere decât să mă citesc deloc.
So your point is a very good one about translation being a kind of form of betrayal, but it's a necessary form of betrayal if we're gonna be open to world literature. If we can find. I mean, I should have learned Romanian to read Nina Kasian, but since that was trouble for me, I could read her in English and get a feeling for what she's like. And then there's the additional complication, I would say, that some poets translate very badly and some poets translate very well. The poets who translate badly or poorly, who are impossible to translate, are poets where the meaning is completely dependent on the sound.
Poeții care nu pot fi traduși sau sunt foarte dificil de tradus sunt aceia pe căror poeme, în care sensul poemelor e foarte strâns legat de limbaj.
But there are other poets who the meaning of their poems is not entirely dependent on sound.
Dar sunt și poeți în ale căror opere sensul nu e total dependent de sunet.
So an extreme example of an untranslatable poet would be Klebnikov.
Klebnikov, un poet rus de la începutul secolului 20.
Because it's all sound.
Nu poate fi tradus pentru că Nina Cassian invented a language, a poetic language, which he called the spark language, which is an entirely invented language.
Like nonsense poetry.
Yes, nonsense poetry, but it has logic, and the syntax is Romanian, although the words do not make sense.
That's like Lewis Carroll. Nonsense poetry works like this.
Nonsense poetry.
But at the other extreme, like a philosophical poet like Zbigniew Herbert or Wisława Szymborska, the Polish poets, they translate very well.
Poeți, așa zicând filozofi, cum ar fi Zbigniew Herbert și Wisława Szymborska, polonezi.
Because the character of the poetry is in something else, not just in the meter and the sound.
Căci sensul nu stă doar în expresivitatea lingvistică și
But I think it's important to remember your point, which is when you're reading a poem in another language, you are reading something else, not the original poem.
Când citești un poem în traducere, citești altceva, nu poemul original.